This may be the single greatest summary of Islam that has ever existed anywhere on the internet. If I had a magic red button that would beam this video clip to every iPhone and TV screen and classroom screen and cinema and billboard on earth, I would be pressing this button repeatedly. Please watch the entire thing. I didn't think this was going to hold my attention, but please watch it. Everything this guy says is exactly the information that we all need to be equipped with if we want to stop the Islamic takeover of the West. And I guarantee you that by the end of watching this video, you'll know more about Islam than 99% of Muslims even do. So without further ado, watch this clip and please share it. You'll understand why in just a second. Let's go.
Muhammad was a warrior. He fought in 66 battles and raids. And so his men would raid caravans, but then they went to the Mediterranean and they would raid ships. And they would raid the coast of Spain and Italy and France and bring the slaves into North Africa. They enslaved over 1 million Europeans. There were whole Catholic orders in Europe through the Middle Ages called the Trinitarians, and the head of the order was called the ransomer.
The Muslims enslaved Europeans?
Correct. Yeah, and then they also enslaved blacks. So Muhammad was a white Arab. There are hadiths that says Muhammad was the white man reclining on a couch. Another hadith, he was lifting his arms. They saw the whiteness of his armpits. Another hadith, he was on his donkey. It rubs up against somebody else. And the guy said, I saw the whiteness of the prophet's thigh. And Muhammad owned black slaves like Bilal. And so Islam enslaved tens of millions of Africans, castrate the men, make them eunuchs, sell the women into the sex trafficking. Timbuktu, where the canoe meets the caravan, was a big slave trading city. Khartoum, Zanzibar coast, Tanzania. And they sold blacks for centuries across Africa and then the Ottoman Empire. But then when the Turks invaded Europe, they would capture Christian towns, Bulgaria and Albania and Romania, and they would take the Christian boys and make them into their Muslim Janissary soldiers. And then, in Egypt, they were called Mamluk slave soldiers. And so the idea is that the Europeans would pay an annual tribute to the Muslim pirates to leave their country's ships alone. Even Sweden, in the 1600s, some Muslim pirates raided Baltimore, Ireland, round up the whole town, took them to Morocco and sold them into slavery. Dragut Reis. And so even the Pilgrims in 1625, they sent a ship full of beaver skins back to England. And William Bradford said the ship was in the English Channel when a Turkish man of war captured it, took it to Morocco and sold the crew into slavery. Mm. And so once America became independent of Britain, the Sultan in Morocco said, well, you're not covered under the British tribute payment anymore. You're your own country. You got to pay up.
If otherwise, the Barbary pirates will come after your ships.
Right. And so that's where President Obama said, Morocco was the first country to recognize America's independence. And it's like, yeah, so that they could tax us. And so they were capturing our Americans and enslaving them. The Polly, these different ships. And so right after the revolution, Thomas Jefferson is sent as an ambassador to France, and he meets with Abdurrahman, the Muslim ambassador. And he's like, why are you enslaving us, our men? What did we do to offend you? And the Muslim ambassador said that, no, it's just written in our Quran that all nations that do not acknowledge Islam authority were sinners. And it was a right and duty to make them slaves. And any Muslim who should die in battle is sure to go to paradise. So Jefferson owned a Quran to figure out what's in this book that makes them want to hate us when we didn't do anything wrong to them. Rather than the news media saying, oh, Keith Ellison swore into office on Jefferson's Quran. Gee, Jefferson must have loved Islam. No, the day after his inauguration as the third president, he gets a demand from the Pasha of Tripoli for $250,000 extortion tribute payment. And Jefferson said, I did the only reasonable thing. I sent in a squadron of our ships.
Bill, do you think that some Muslims are not that extreme, that they are moderate, where the fundamentalist Muslims basically give Islam a bad reputation?
Yes, I would say most of them are moderate. And so the word Islam means submission to the will of Allah. A Muslim is one who has submitted to the will of Allah, and they think there will be world peace when the whole world submits to the will of Allah. And so to them, world peace means world Islam. And so it's a different definition of the word. So when we say peace, it's different groups that don't believe the same thing learning how to get along. When they say peace, it's when all your enemies are defeated. There's nobody left to conquer. There's nobody left to fight. Now, a moderate Muslim believes the world will submit to Allah later, maybe in the distant future, maybe at the end of the world, maybe it's even figurative. And since it's so far off, they really don't think about it, and they just want to live their lives, and they're wonderful people, and they want to have you as friends and family. And the fundamental Muslim, they want the world to submit to Allah now, and they're really excited, and they want to help make it happen.
And they'll do it by all means.
And the dilemma for the West is the nicer we show ourselves, the fundamental Muslims view that niceness as weakness, and they take that as an invitation to attack. And so we think if we bend over a little bit more, they'll be nice. They see us bend it over. They say, look, Allah's given us our enemies. They're showing their neck, right? And so whenever they would lose a major battle of Lepanto, 1571, Battle of Malta, 1565, Battle of Vienna again in 1683. Whenever they would lose major battles, they would go back and be moderate for a generation or two. But then they would do some probing attacks, and if they didn't get slapped down, then they would take this as a signal they're supposed to get back into the aggressive mode. And so the moderate Muslims prefer to be under the umbrella of the West and enjoy the freedoms. So ladies can wear fashions and they can eat what they want and go out whenever they want. Ladies can leave the house without their husband's permission. They can leave the house without being accompanied by a male relative. So they would prefer the freedoms. But when the fundamental ones do a terrorist attack and the West doesn't come down strong on the fundamental ones, the moderate ones realize, well, gee, if you're not going to defend us, the only player in town is them. We got to lean in their direction.
They have no choice. So the West showing weakness is pushing the moderate Muslims towards fundamental Islam.
And the fundamental Muslims are just as happy to kill a moderate Muslim as they are to kill an infidel. Right? So they view them as having backslidden from the way of Allah.
So is that how they basically took on Christian countries? Like Egypt was a Christian country. Now it's predominantly Muslim. Lebanon, Syria, all of these countries were Christians. Now they're Muslim countries through the same tug of war between fundamentalists and moderate Muslims who basically had no support to push against it?
Yeah, well, in more recent times, they're using our tolerance against us. But originally, they simply played politics. So a little background. Muhammad was born in 570 A.D. His father dies before he's born. His mother dies when he's 6. His grandfather and guardian dies when he's 8. He's orphaned, taken in by an uncle, Abu Talib, who's a merchant, who goes on camel rides to different cities and hears about the different religions. And so some of the cities were Persian, and they had Zoroastrianism that believed that paradise was filled full of virgins that would fulfill all the guy's desires. Muhammad hears this, and it gets incorporated into his belief system. The Zoroastrians also believed in jinns or genies, right, like 1001 Arabian Nights. And then there's a religion of Manichaeism. Mani was this person that thought there was little bits of truth in every religion, and you could sort of extract them. A follower of Manichaeism was St. Augustine, until he met the guy and realized he didn't know what he was talking about. Spent the rest of his life debunking Manichaeism. But Muhammad heard about this. Hey, maybe there's little bits of truth in different ones. There's the Sabaeans in the Yemen area, and they were into chopping off, hands and legs, and they would go on pilgrimage, and they'd, spit on the devil and throw rocks at him. And that got incorporated into their traditions. And then in Arabia, in Mecca, they had 360 different pagan gods in a square building called the Kaaba. And the most popular was Hubal, the moon god. And they had a rock they thought had fallen from the moon. It's a glass impact rock where a meteor hit the desert sand, melted it into this brown glass. And these pagans would kiss this rock, walk around this rock, bow to this rock for centuries pre-Muhammad. Muhammad kissed that rock. It got incorporated into his belief system. And then he went to some Jewish communities, and he originally had his followers bowing toward Jerusalem for the first 17 months of Islam. And then there's the Christian faith. And even Encyclopedia Britannica says the gospel was made known to Muhammad through apocryphal and heretical sources. So he thought the Trinity was the Father, Mary, and Jesus. Nobody ever explained to him the Holy Spirit. And so Muhammad goes into a cave, and there's a movement sweeping through Egypt at this time called monasticism, where if you really become a Christian, you should give away your money and live in a cave as a hermit. All right, just withdraw.
It sounds so
you know, it's sort of like our version of separation of churches. I'm just going to withdraw from politics. I'm just going to enjoy my own relationship with God. And so they call them desert fathers. But Muhammad goes into a cave and he prays, and a spirit appears to him and squeezes him and commands him to read. And he said, I cannot read, because he was illiterate. Spirit squeezed him a second time, said, read. He said, I cannot read. So it happened a third time. And then finally he began to recite. And that's how the Quran came to him. He'd get these verses, he'd recite them till he had them memorized, and he'd teach them to his followers. And people say, how can somebody that's illiterate memorize all these verses? Well, in Arabic, they had a little rhyme to them, a little beat, very similar to rap music, right? Thomas Carlyle wrote in 1840, Arabs see more method in it, and much of it is rhythmic, a kind of wild chanting. So Muhammad goes back to his wife, Khadijah. She's 40 years old. He's 25. He had worked for her, and then she marries him. And he tells her that he thinks he's demon-possessed. And she decides to test the spirit, according to Ibn Ishaq, the life of Muhammad. And so she has him sit on her left thigh and says, can you see the spirit? He goes, yes, over there. It has him sit on her right thigh. Can you see the spirit? Yes, over there. Then she began to disclose her form and take off some of her veils and says, can you see the spirit? And he said, no. And she said, well, it must have been from God, because it was embarrassed to look upon me without all my veils on. So that was the test.
Is this something that, like, people who study Islam verify and believe?
It's in their traditions, Ibn Ishaq. And so she takes Muhammad to her cousin, who's an Ebionite Christian priest, this heretical sect that says Jesus was less than God. And he said maybe this was the spirit that appeared to Moses, and then he dies, and so now Muhammad's left with this spirit. Anyway, in 610 AD, Muhammad goes into Mecca and feels like there's something in his faith for everyone, and nobody is excited about it. He gets confrontational. They chase him out of town first in 619 AD. His wife dies that year. It's his year of sorrows. And so then he tries going to a city of Al-Taif. They don't want him. They pelt him with rocks and stones. And so in 622 AD, he goes to a majority Jewish city called Medina. And so they're nice and tolerant, and they let Muhammad in as the first ever Muslim immigrant. And he presents his faith, and they say, you're not a prophet in the line of our Jewish prophets, but they let him stay. So he goes into the minority neighborhoods, and he organizes a following, sort of like a community organizer. When the following gets big enough, he goes back to the Jews and he gets involved in politics. He pressures the Jews to accommodate him and his new followers politically. They make a treaty. So now Muhammad is a political leader in addition to being a religious leader. Then his followers back in Mecca get confrontational. They get chased out of town for disturbing the peace. Now there's lots of Muslim immigrants. The Jews let them in, and Muhammad allows them to rob the caravans headed to Mecca in retaliation for the Meccans chasing them out. So the victimhood thing. We're the victims. They were intolerant of us, so we're justified in attacking their caravans. So this is different than Jesus, who said, if they take your coat, give them your shirt. And so Muhammad gets verses from his Allah that he gets a fifth of the booty from robbing caravans. One of the verses says, Allah has given you the slave girls as your booty. So he tells his men, you can have 4 wives plus as many extra women as your right hand possesses, as you take in battle. They're bond women, concubines, slave wives. They just don't have the status of a wife. And so the 624 AD, the Meccans send 1,000 soldiers to protect their caravan. And Muhammad, with 300, defeats 1,000 at the Battle of Badra. This amazing victory convinces him to be a military leader. And then in 627 AD, the Meccans send 10,000 soldiers to Medina. And Muhammad digs potholes and trenches all around the city. It's called the Battle of the Trench. And that renders the cavalry of the Meccans useless. You can't charge your horses across a field full of potholes and trenches. They'll break their legs. So Muhammad goes to some of the Meccans at night, bribes them, they slip away. Some of the other Meccans at night threatens them, they slip away. Sort of the Chicago politics, the bribe or the bullet. Gets freezing cold for a week. The rest of the Meccans lose heart and retreat. And Muhammad takes this as a victory, that his enemies were cowards. He goes back into that Jewish city, gets offended at one of the Jewish tribes, confiscates their property, chases them out of town, and the other two tribes sort of stand down. Well, at least he's not picking on us, and they were always competition for me. Now there's only two Jewish tribes. He gets offended at the smaller of the two. And the big tribe sort of stands back. Well, he's not picking on us, and they were always competition. Now there's only one Jewish tribe. And according to the Hadith, Muhammad is taking a bath, and that spirit appears to him and says, how can you rest when all his enemies are in your midst? He says, where it points at that last Jewish neighborhood. He surrounds them for 28 days. When they surrender, he brings them into the market, chops off the head of the men, about 600 or 700, and then sells the women and children into slavery. So within 5 years of Muhammad coming into the Jewish city of Medina as an immigrant, there's not a Jew left in the city of Medina. They were chased out, killed, or enslaved. So when Mandami a couple weeks ago said, my religion began with the prophet being
like
an
New York.
immigrant. And so it's a three-step process: immigrate, increase, eliminate. Immigrate as a religious refugee, and then increase the number of your followers in the minority neighborhoods and get involved in politics. And then you have random outbreaks of violence, usually by the young men, knifing, rapes, acid attacks, and the inhabitants of the neighborhood no longer feel safe and move out, and you take over the neighborhood. And then you do the city by city, country by country, right? And there's a 1,400-year track record of watching this happen. So there's two ways it spreads. One is through the sword, and the other is through immigration, right? And it's called dawah, Dawah, dawah. It's immigration jihad, civilizational. So it's you come in to a host country, sort of like an invasive species, and then you grow and build. And it's interesting. Henry Ford did not like unions, and he's traveling the world looking for another source of rubber because originally came from plants. And he's over in the Middle East, and a Yemeni man puts his luggage on the boat, does such a good job. Henry Ford said, if you show up in Detroit, I'll give you $5 a day. That begins this Arab migration into Detroit. And sure enough, they did not join unions, and they worked hard. And they enjoyed being in America. And they started the first Islamic association in America. They founded the first mosque in America, and they were friendly. And everybody says they're friendly, they're hard workers. There's nothing to fear. Let more in. More come in. They're friendly, they're hard workers. Let more in. And then they begin to build a community. And then an imam shows up, and he says, okay, now that we're all here, we need to start following the Quran a little bit closer. I saw your wife out shopping, and she was not covered modestly. He goes home and says, you better start covering up. And then he sees somebody, I saw you were having lunch with this infidel, and you're not supposed to be close friends with infidels. And it's like, and then your daughter was at a public swimming pool in a swimming suit. And these imams would gradually shepherd the community to becoming closer to following Muhammad's example. And so that brings up another interesting thing. Sharia, the word means law, and it's based on Muhammad. What Muhammad permitted is permitted. It is called halal. What Muhammad did not permit is not permitted. It is called haram. And so Muhammad liked cats. Cats are halal. They are permitted. Muhammad did not like dogs. Dogs are haram. They are not permitted. And so Sharia law is a long list of halals and harams, what's permitted and what's not permitted, and the local imam keeps the list. But if you ask, well, I want to know, why is that haram? I'm sorry, you can't ask why. But I really want to know, why is that haram? Don't ask again or I'll kill you. You don't even know why. It is just a religion of do's and don'ts. And the imam tells you what the do's and the don'ts are. And so then Christians want to imitate Jesus, and Muslims want to imitate Muhammad. Except in the Christian theology, you don't go to heaven by being like Jesus. You believe Jesus was the Lamb of God that took the punishment for our sins, so we don't take the punishment for our sins. Right? He was the substitute, and it's the theological symbolism was in the Old Testament. You have the law and the Lamb, right? You have the Pentateuch, and there's all these laws, but all these sacrifices. And it's almost like for every law that's broken, there's a prescribed sacrifice. And then there's the once a year with the Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, when the sacrifice is sprinkled on the mercy seat and everyone's sins in the country are forgiven. They all start their new year off with a clean slate. And it's this idea that we're approaching God not because we're good enough. We're not good enough. Everybody breaks the law. We approach God because we're trusting in his mercy, right? And that this substitute. And I tell people that Jews have faith in the Lamb to come, Christians have faith in the Lamb that came, but the salvation is through the Lamb. You're trusting not in your being good enough, you're trusting in God's mercy, right? But there's none of that theology in Islam. It's just a religion of do's and don'ts, a religion of works. And the closer you can follow Muhammad's example, the better chance you have of going to paradise. But even Muhammad himself said, though I'm the prophet of Allah, I don't know what Allah will do with me. So he didn't even know. And so people say, I've read the Quran, I know Islam. Well, you don't. The Quran are private revelations to Muhammad, and there's the verses he gets in Mecca that are more peaceful, be respectful of the Jews and the Christians, the people of the book. But the verses he gets in Medina are more political and militant. And the later verses supersede or erase the earlier verses. Wow. But then there's the Hadith. There's 60,000 stories remembered about Muhammad from his wives and warriors. Then there's the Sirat, the biography of Muhammad that puts his life in chronological order, written 100 years after his death. And then there's 1,400 years of rulings broken into 4 different schools of thought interpreting the Quran and the Hadith. It's very complicated. You have the Shiite and the Sunni versions. And
they fight too.
Yeah. And that's an interesting story. I know I'm going in lots of different directions. The Sunni and Shiite is important to understand this for what's going on in Iran. Muhammad had a daughter, Fatima, married to Ali, and his followers are Shiite Ali or Shia or Shiite. 15% of Muslims are Shiite. They're mostly in Iran.
Iranians.
Muhammad had lots of wives, and so he had lots of father-in-laws. But the father-in-law of Aisha, the 6-year-old that he married, consummated at 9, Aisha, her dad was Abu Bakr. And he fought with Muhammad in his battles, his 66 battles and raids. And he said, I know the way. So the word for the way is Sunni. So we have the Shia and the Sunni. Now, in the Battle of Karbala, if I'm not mistaken, is when Hussein, the son of Ali, was killed by the Sunnis. And so that started a blood feud that went on till now.
Till now. Yeah.
And the 12th descendant, the bloodline of Muhammad, they're called Sharifs, but the 12th one, he was 5 years old and disappears from history in the year 874. And the Shiite believe he's been hiding in a cave for 1,200 years. And that if the Ayatollah can create a world war on purpose, this 12th Imam, this Mahdi, will come out of the cave, and then their version of Christ, which is sort of the Christian version of the Antichrist, he will return, and together they'll kill the little Satan Israel, they'll kill the big Satan America, they'll kill all the Christians and all the Jews and all the apes and all the pigs, and they'll set up a one-world government that's Islamic called the Caliphate. And so where the communists have nuclear weapons, but they're not in a hurry to use them, the Ayatollah, with this 12er version of Shia Islam, actually wants to create a global war to usher in this global government of Islam. And so that's why, both Trump and Hegseth said, we can't let this guy have the nuclear weapons because he will use them. He just got done killing 50,000 of his own people that were demonstrating.
All right, we'll end it there. The podcast keeps going on, but I just thought that was the best little chunk of a podcast I think I've ever seen describing what's going on when it comes to Islam, the history of it, how we can understand the patterns of behavior of Muslims, and therefore we need to be equipped with this information in order to tackle the problems that we're facing today when it comes to Islam in the West, in the rest of the world. And my goodness, this needs to go viral. Please, if you can, Send this to at least one other person, ideally as many as you can. Please send this to as many people as you can. I don't know if on social media or whatever it is, just WhatsApp it to people. If you're shy to post it publicly, get the word out about this. All right. Give this video a thumbs up. Hype this video if you can, please. Subscribe if you haven't already. And I guess I'll speak to you in the next one. But my goodness, I think that must be the best summary of Islam I have ever heard in one continuous speech. The guy's knowledge on this is incredible. I believe he's just written a book on this. So yeah, just go check out his work and get the word out. Please, please get the word out. This is like one of the major missions on this show. And I think it needs to be a mission of all of us personally who watch this kind of content and care and can see what's happening to get this message out. So anyway, peace be with you. God bless you all. And I'll speak to you in the next video. Speak soon.